to the SaWGuy podcast.
Like scary movies. What's your favorite scary movie?
Here's Johnny.
We'll tear your soul apart.
The boogeyman is real, and you found him.
Game over, man. Game over.
What do you want?
I want to hear you scream. Drop the prime time, bitch!
Welcome to the SaWGuy podcast. As always, I'm the SaWGuy, bringing you episode 20. Yes, that episode right there, the one that you guys all voted, A Nightmare on Elm Street. You guys, oh my god, man. I was torturing everybody and said, hey, let me know your favorite film. Let me know, tell me your favorites. And, you guys responded by beating the shit out of that goddamn drum. And everybody was telling me, A Nightmare on Elm Street. A Nightmare on Elm Street. And I said it in the previous special edition episode that for every 10 people that told me their favorite horror film, on top of that list was A Nightmare on Elm Street. So you know what? SaWGuy's bringing you A Nightmare on Elm Street right here. So thanks again for everybody who participated. I want to give that shout out to all of you. You guys are very much appreciative. And I couldn't do this without you guys, and I wouldn't be here. So I wanted to get that out of the way and let you guys know that I'm very humble, very appreciative of that. But anyways, let's get started with this episode, right? So, A Nightmare on Elm Street. We've all heard of Nightmare on Elm Street, right? Everybody knows about Freddy Krueger, the guy who wears the crazy brown hat, the fucked up green sweater. I was wearing my claw earlier, but yeah, this is not a legit one, but it's semi-prop, but it's heavy as shit. But my point being, everybody knows that claw. Everybody does, Just like everybody knows that the serial killer Jason, he walks around with a machete, right? How did it become so iconic, right? What was the mystery behind Fred Krueger that made A Nightmare on Elm Street the franchise? And you can make the argument that A Nightmare on Elm Street was one of the best. I'm talking hands down best franchise ever made. Why? Well, I'll tell you why, It all started with this first film, A Nightmare on Elm Street. And we all know, well, most of us crazy horror fans know, that A Nightmare on Elm Street it's like your first film to get into anything. When you start collecting or doing anything, everybody knows what's your first. Well, everybody's first film was always A Nightmare on Elm Street. 90% of the time, but I won't get into that, right? But anyways, A Nightmare on Elm Street was released in 1984, and it starred Robert Englund, and, I don't know how to present it. I was going to say, and Johnny Depp. Yes, it was Johnny Depp's first acting role. And Johnny Depp actually got the role by accident because Jackie Earle Haley, who played Freddy in the remake, went with him to go do the audition, right? And as Jackie Earle Haley did the audition, they were like, on his auditioning. And then they saw Johnny Depp and he had that it factor, and the rest is history, right? But anyways, it stars all those actors, and with Wes Craven, what he did is that he did this whole film based on everything out of his vision. Everything about this film is all from Wes Craven. He obviously directed it, he obviously wrote the whole story, but he put in a lot of little tidbits and everything. Most of us know the tidbits. For some of the non-hardcore fans, I'll fill you in on it and let you know. Wes Craven, he wrote this film right after Swamp Thing. So it was early 80s when he did that. And everything that he went through in life all kind of built up to how everything came about with A Nightmare on Elm Street. So I want to say with Fred Krueger, the name, he got it from a bully that used to fuck with him when he was a kid. He got the look of Fred Krueger was because of the fact that he had this homeless guy that would walk through the alleyway behind his apartment when he was a kid and always would stare at him. And he always wore a red and green sweater. Well, there's different theories on it. He would wear a red and green sweater and a hat, and he just would wink at him and be creepy. And then later on, Wes Craven came out later, and this is all from my research, because I researched the shit out of everything. Y'all know that. He said that he chose the sweater as red and green because they're the two hardest colors to stare at, which I don't know if it's hard to stare at, but right? But he read it in a scientific article that said, it's more of a creepy color. It just throws everything off, So that's where he basically got into all his little aspects and little winks into it. Through the film, you see other winks that he's done from his previous films, from The Last House on the Left and things like that, but I'll get into that later. But anyways, Wes Craven, he did this whole film by himself, and when he wrote this, he did it right after Swamp Thing, and then he tried to sell it to all these studios. Universal said no. Paramount said no because they've already had a movie similar to how Nightmare on Elm Street was. Similar, I use quotations. And he got desperate enough to try to do it through Disney. I don't know if it was an act of desperation, but I know he would try to sell it through Disney, and I think because they owned Miramax at the time, which wasn't under the Disney banner. And Disney said they liked the idea, they just want to make it kid-friendly. Which is kind of funny, but at the same time, it's believable because Disney at that time, that's when they started making scripts, and not scripts, but they were writing stories for later on down the road in the early 90s for like Hocus Pocus and all these other Halloween films, right? Wow, I'm out of breath. This is, I'm all excited for this episode. I've been waiting about it, talking about it. Hell, even been dreaming about this episode, right? But anyways, back to the episode. So, when Wes Craven, he tried to get everything going, his last resort was New Line Cinema. What was New Line Cinema? It was basically a cinema company that was owned by one person, Robert Shaye. And what he did to make his money off of it is that he would buy like these old 1930 films, like Reefer Madness and a bunch of other ones when their licenses were up. And he basically would go to movie theaters and allow them to, play the films and stuff. So anyways, Wes Craven and Bob Shaye, they met, got together, and they talked about, okay, how they were going to plan out the movie. The only deal is that Robert Shaye would be in it as well. Well, yeah, I'm trying to remember. Yeah, Robert Shaye, or Rob Shaye. I can't even remember his name. Bob Shaye. Why am I saying Robert? I'm going crazy. Robert or Bob. Anyways, he was a Shaye. He wanted to be in the film. And you see him as one of the teachers and things like that in the film. And I don't think he was in the film. I don't know. I've been watching all of them, to be honest with you. I'm going crazy a little bit, as you could tell. But anyways, he had this deal put in place that he wanted a little bit of control of it. He wanted the final say. So Wes Craven said, okay, fine. So they put together the budget. The budget came out to almost $2 million. And as they shot it, I think within like 20, 25 days. And they did everything they can, all the, cinema secrets to try to get everything to pop out. Everything from when Nancy was running up the stairs and she got stuck. It was actually just pancake mix that they left out. Little tidbit on that. But it was interesting how they did it and how Wes Craven wanted his vision, because he was the master of horror. And he's still regarded as one of the masters of horror. But what made Nightmare on Elm Street so spooky and so scary, not only was Freddy Krueger's appearance, but the fact that he was different from all the other serial killers. As I said, Jason had the machete. We all know Michael Myers had the kitchen knife. We all know that Leatherface had the chainsaw. So to make him stand out, they did the Freddy Claw. And it was really cool how they did it, because right in the beginning of the film, first 2 minutes, you see an actor, I don't think it was Robert Englund, but it was an actor who was wearing the sweater, and he was putting together crudely. Everything from pipes to straight edge razors for the bend on it, and then he used like steak knives, and then sharpened the shit out of him, and they just played off with it. It was just fucking great how they did that. But anyways, so we go into the movie, and it starts the whole story about how one of Nancy's friends, the main character, she was having nightmares. And they never really explained it. I tried looking into it, like, what the hell? Like, because in the beginning, she has a bad dream, and she kept seeing a goat. If you guys know what that meaning is, let me know in the comments below, because I tried researching it, and all I heard was it's a wink from Wes Craven. But he even did that later on, and Freddy vs. Jason put a goat out there. I don't know. There's a reference to it somewhere. But anyways, Tina has a bad dream. She wakes up, and she tells Nancy, her best friend, who is dating Johnny Depp, and then she has a boyfriend who is one of those typical 80 biker dudes. He wears the leather jacket, the jeans, the white shirt and shit, right? they go to school, and then she says, okay, let's do a sleepover. I'm afraid to go to sleep. So they have, your normal teenager in the 80s. They had their slumber party, and they hang out. Her boyfriend comes over. They have sexual relations. They go to sleep. She wakes up, and she thinks she's in her, normal. But she doesn't realize that she's in a dream. She goes outside her house, and then that's when they first introduce Freddy. And he comes out, and basically he has these long-ass arms. And she's all freaking out. Please, God, this is God. Everybody knows that scene. But what was more iconic and made it like, what the fuck kind of thing, was the fact that he chased her as she was trying to go in the house, and then it flashes right into her boyfriend waking up, and you see her body just kind of jumbling all around, and then all of a sudden her shirt opens, and then you see like the razor slits, and then she starts bleeding everywhere. Then he drags her through the roof and then drops her. Great effect. Oh man, hands down, great effect. I just that back in the day, the quality wasn't as good for filming and VHS. Like when you watched it at home, it was all grainy, but it's scary as shit for its time. And because you never see anything that, I shouldn't say demented, but that different, that intense, I should say. So later on, the story goes is that the guy, her boyfriend, starts freaking out. He breaks through the window and he's looking for him. Nancy's dad, he's the sheriff of, the county that they live in, Springwood, and she starts having doubts about things, and that's when she starts thinking about, okay, who's this guy that did that? And then Freddy, little by little, starts fucking with her. And then as she's walking to school, the day after, the boyfriend, tries to tell her, hey, it wasn't me, it was somebody else. And her dad had basically followed her and set her up just to make sure, shit doesn't go down or whatever. So she goes to school, then she falls asleep in class. Who doesn't fall asleep in class, right? But anyways, she falls asleep, and then that's when she first meets Freddy and starts freaking out about it. Wakes up, and then she starts having more issues. And then later on, it's just, I believe they went to the funeral, or the funeral scene had happened before. No, the funeral scene had happened before, I believe. Because in the dream, she started seeing Tina, in a zip-up bag, body bag kind of thing. But the whole movie was just like this cat and mouse thing. And it was creepy because you never saw Freddy. You always saw the silhouette. You always saw something like this, and then it would show his mouth. It was always dark around him. And Wes Craven did that purposely to make it more creepy. Kind of like what I do with my filters, but I do my filters so all this shit back here doesn't distract you when I'm filming. But anyways, Wes Craven, he had his hands all over on this to make it that much scarier, that much better, that much more intense, because he believed that if you were getting into the story, it's not going to be as typical, boom, jump scare, right? It was more or less, he basically had to he had to work for it, to get you hooked into your seats, watching the film, getting all hooked, and all of a sudden, boom, And there was a lot of different scenes that became iconic. Obviously, the one where Nancy's at home, she goes to sleep in the bathtub, or dozes off a little bit. Freddy's claw comes out and tries to chase after her when she's asleep. She gets pulled in the tub. Then they have the scene where she goes to the sleep center, and they start studying her sleeping habits. And then she wakes up, and she has cuts on her arm, but also at the same time, she pulls out Freddy Krueger's hat. And she doesn't, you find out in this film, the twist is, they all are trying to say Nancy's crazy. Well, then her mom finally came out and said, Nancy, you're crazy because I know who Fred Krueger is. And she told her the whole story about Fred Krueger. And Fred Krueger in the film, they wanted to play an aspect that he was a child molester, but in the 80s there was a lot of real stuff like that happening, and Wes Craven didn't want any of that bad attention to it. So he basically said from a child molester to a child murderer, right? So the mom explained to Nancy, hey, he was a child murderer, he would murder kids in the neighborhood. They arrested him. He got off on a technicality because somebody fucked up on signing off for his search warrant, and when we found out where his hideout was, we basically burned it down and watched him burn. And it's kind of creepy how she explained the story because the acting was so great. This film, for what it was, they had a lot of great actors. I mean, obviously, everyone's going to run over and say Robert Englund, which obviously, he's Freddy. They tried doing the remake and, Freddy is Robert Englund, bottom line, right? obviously you had Johnny Depp, Heather Langenkamp, and you also had John Saxon, who was her dad, who played the sheriff. He got big because he did a lot of kung fu movies, did some Western movies, but he was one of those, great actors towards the end of his twilight. Same thing with the mom. She was a great actor, and she was more towards the end of her twilight, but they were all great acting. They got you hooked. They made it more believable, and it's just phenomenal for what it was. And then later on in the story, after she figured out who Freddy was, her and Johnny Depp, obviously they were dating. They would hang out and stuff, talk back and forth. And he would come over and things like that. And she had him on guard duty when she went to sleep and just said, hey, watch me. And he actually really went to sleep. That was kind of a funny scene to me. It was just humor, 80 humor, right? But anyways, the best scene in this film, hands down, was actually Johnny Depp's death. To build up to that scene, it was basically the parents, they just had enough. The mom had enough. So she's like, fuck it, I'm going to lock everything down, put, bars on the windows, everything like that. And what they did from there is that she tried to get out, but she couldn't because the mom had a deadbolt and locked up the key and hid it somewhere. But anyways, she was calling her boyfriend, Johnny Depp. His name in the movie was Glenn. And she said, okay, whatever you do, don't fall asleep. Meet me at my place at midnight. Well, midnight's coming around, and he's already kind of dozing off. And Glenn's parents are getting pissed off because all the parents in this film, they all think Nancy's crazy because they were all part of it. Where they lived at in Springwood, I think, yeah, it was Springwood. They were all involved because it was meant to be like a small town. And anyways, they knew of Fred Krueger, but what I love, I looked up an article, and Robert Englund had even said that this film is about teen empowerment, because all the parents knew everything that would happen, and they felt the guilt of everything that what went down. Obviously the mom's an alcoholic. The whole movie, she's fucking stashing vodka bottles and blankets and shit. I got a kick out of that. I was like, God damn, that's freaking crazy, dude, right? But, it's just none of the parents gave a shit in this film. That's what the whole thing and this whole movie was about, was teen empowerment, right? So the build up to the whole scene and the wink that gave it away is that Freddy Krueger was calling the phone and fucking with her, which led to that best scene, I'm your boyfriend now, Nancy, and the tongue came out. And then that's when she flipped out like, what the fuck? And then they showed the scene where Johnny Depp's sleeping, and he... I laugh because it's so 80s. He has a TV, the record player on, and it's so odd. Like, he's trying to multitask. I mean, shit that we take for granted that we can all do on our phone now. But anyways, he's laying there, and the bed pulls him in, and then it's just a geyser of blood. Best scene, hands down. Oh man. If you ever want to know like how they did the whole scene and the setup and everything, there's a documentary. It's 5 hours long, but it gets through all the Freddy Kruegers. It's called Never Sleep Again. So if you never heard of that, look it up, check it out, because that's fucking amazing. But anyways, back to the movie. I love the scene with it because they just made it like, whoa, what the hell? Because now it plays off that less is more thing. Like, how did he just get sucked up and then all of a sudden just blood's pouring out? And for me, for the longest time, I always thought, shit, maybe he pulled him down and then he just turned into a blender and blend him up and then, out that way, right? And then it led up to this big climax where Nancy was waiting for him. She had read books on survival tips and everything, how to survive, things like that, booby traps. I laugh at the term booby traps because you don't hear it too often. It was an 80s term, Classic 80s. Yeah. But anyways, she goes to sleep, and then she drags Freddy into the real world. And then at the same time, she's trying to get her dad's attention, who's at Glenn's house across the street, checking on his body. And the dad is just kind of freaking out, just like, okay, whatever, And then all of a sudden, when he starts seeing that his daughter's going crazy, that's when he goes and tries to break in the house. She basically defeats Freddy, and Freddy falls on the mom. The dad sees all that happen, and then the mom is just basically a corpse, goes into the bed, and the bed comes out normal. The dad walks away and says, I don't know how to handle this shit. And, well, anyways, Freddy comes up and tries to get Nancy, and then Nancy was like, nope, And the whole movie was, Freddy got his powers based on their fear. The more that they were afraid, the more power that he had, and she knew that. And then the movie ends where it's all like happy ending, or was it? Wes Craven's original ending was to be that everything was all dandy and that was it. You know, everybody got over it and it was a one and done. Wes Craven was never a fan of doing sequels. Everybody knows that. At least at this time, you know, when this film came out, he just said he wanted to do a one and done. But since he signed that deal with New Line said, nope, we're going to leave it with an open-ended twist. So the twist that you see at the end where Glenn and all her friends are fine, he comes up in his convertible, picks her up, and then the convertible top comes down, and it ends up being the red and green sweater, colorized, and then Freddy Krueger's taking control. The mom is waving at the door, and all of a sudden Freddy breaks out through that little tiny peephole window, grabs the mom, pulls her right in. End of film. Great fucking cinematography on that. Because you don't expect it. You think everything's good, and then all of a sudden, like, what gave it away was just, you saw the color for a second go down on the top, and then all of a sudden just boom, you know, and pulled the mom out. And, you know, moral of the story was, it was a great film. Wes Craven wanted to do a one and done. And that's why Nightmare on Elm Street still holds up to this day, because it had his whole divided attention. He basically put all his heart, soul, blood, tears, everything into this. Everything to how Freddy looked, and to the glove, to the characters, to the winks of his other films with the booby traps and everything. He put a lot of effort into the story and trying to make sure that he got the right actors to do it, right? New Line, because it became such a big hit. I mean, they call it the movie, well, they call New Line the house that Freddy built. And the reason why they phrased that is because Nightmare on Elm Street was so big, because they invested nearly all their money into it, $2 million. They turned around and just like quadrupled that money. And that's when New Line said, okay, we're going to start producing sequels, right? I'll get into that actually on my next episode. Spoiler alert. I'm going to do the whole franchise. Y'all love Nightmare on Elm Street so much. I love Nightmare on Elm Street, so I'm going to give you the whole back thing on it on the next episode. But this one, all about the original and what makes it so special and carried on this whole franchise, right? So, everything with the Nightmare on Elm Street, what makes it so special, bottom line, what makes it special is the fact that it was a creepy-ass film. It was done totally different for what it was in the era. And the fact that just you had the right actors in place. Bottom line, you know. A movie could be great, it could be okay, but if you have the right actors into it, any movie can be great. It really can, you know. And with A Nightmare on Elm Street, it doesn't get a lot of credit for some of the other actors. Everybody remembers Robert Englund. Everybody remembers Johnny Depp because that was his first role, how he started. But a lot of people forget that John Saxon, he had a lot of accolades in them, you know? He really did. And that's what made the film really stand out, is that they had great actors into it. And the whole movie also played on the aspect of less is more. And what I mean by that, I said it in the last few episodes, especially on the Twilight Zone. This is the main thing what makes horror what horror was, right? It was the aspect of you let your imagination run wild, you know? That's why some scenes they show it, some scenes they don't, you know, because the whole film, you see little bits of Freddy, you see the claw move around and scrape on the bar or on the pipe, and that just, it builds that fear, that anticipation. And Wes Craven knew that, and that's why he made this film the way it was. And bottom line, I mean, you ask anybody, I know I did, where would you rate Nightmare on Elm Street? And most people will put it like at least in their top 5 minimum, you know. I know people that eat, sleep, and breathe everything on A Nightmare on Elm Street, and that's okay, you know, because I'm a Saw guy. I do the same thing for Saw, but I love Nightmare on Elm Street. You know, to be honest with you, Nightmare on Elm Street, I got into it later on, not so much in the 80s, but I remember seeing it a little bit here and there. It didn't really take off until as I got a little bit older, like in the early 90s, and then they had the sequels. And the sequels, after they played them in theaters, they released them on VHS, they play them on TV, and they play them on repeat. And that's how I was able to catch them all the time, and actually got into it and got more hooked, you know? But with A Nightmare on Elm Street, I honestly, I look at some of the stuff that they talked about, especially in the documentary Never Sleep Again, how originally they wanted a stuntman instead of Robert Englund. they tested it out, and Wes Craven was the one that made the call that said, no, fuck that. We're not going to do a stuntman. I need somebody who's an actor. And no offense to any of the stuntmen out there that do the work. You guys do a great job, don't get me wrong. But it's the fact of when you have somebody that has to interact, when you have somebody that has to have certain mannerisms, you need an actor. Bottom line, like I'll throw out this point, like in the remake of A Nightmare on Elm Street, you have Jackie Earle Haley, which was great. I mean, he did a great job for what it was, but a lot of people and a lot of horror fans all know that Fred Krueger will always be Robert Englund. Why is it Robert Englund? Because Robert Englund, he fits the bill. He had the voice, the fact that he had different mannerisms, and I say mannerisms because, if you compare both those Freddys, Fred Krueger was the one who would make those funny puns, or kind of cheesy puns, whatever you want to call them. He had this unique stance where he would sit, but his claw would be out, kind of like a cowboy ready to cock their gun, just, and the fact that he, there's just so many different things with Robert Englund that made him just the perfect character for it. Like, it just blows my mind thinking about that. Like, wow, a stuntman. I mean, stuntmen, they're great. Don't get me wrong. There's been some great stuntmen that have done some work. Kane Hodder, he was Jason, and you had Brad Lorry who played Michael Myers, and and you have Tyler Mane who also played Michael Myers. He wasn't really a stuntman. He did both that and acting. But I mean, it just with Fred Krueger, you had to have a certain unique set. And Robert Englund made that film stand out. He made that character stand out. That's why I believe the remake didn't do as good, because, it wasn't Robert Englund. And a lot of people associate that. You can't have the Kool-Aid without the water. You know what I'm saying? That's basically what it boils down to. But, I look at some of the other stats too. I look at the other, facts and everything about this whole film, how everybody was talking about it. Everything from the themes about anxiety, dreams, teenagers, adulthood. I mean, there's a lot of different themes in this film if you really break it down, And personally, I never really started thinking about it. I never started looking into it until after I started researching for this episode when you guys voted for it. And there's a lot of things going on in this film. And that's what I believe it still makes it stand out. Now, obviously, a lot of people are going to say, oh, that's 80s. It'd be different now if they try to remake it. They remade it, and it was great for what it was, but it's one of those films that has to be, you have to live in that time to understand it a little bit better, to be more creeped out about it, That's my motto on it, I know everybody else has their own opinion, but that's my motto on it, But, yeah. And it's just interesting, just the fact that Wes Craven, he tried to get everybody to purchase a script, and nobody wanted it except Disney, and they wanted them to switch it around. And like I said earlier, I believe that, because later on Disney did their own Halloween films for, kid-friendly films. Hocus Pocus and all those other films, But the 80s were a different time. They were a different breed. And, with everything going on at that time, I guess, what was going on in 84? Trying to remember everything that went on in that era, but you had a lot that was changing. You really did. And the fact that Fred Krueger came out with the Nightmare on Elm Street movie, it pushed it and just basically made the 80s a glorified time for horror films. You ask anybody who's a horror fan, they'll tell you the best time for horror movies was in the 80s. 80s is what made it to the 90s. Obviously the 90s were a little bit slower, but it also brought it back to the 2000s and to the current time. The only thing that sucks now about the current time is that they're trying to catch that magic again, try to catch that lightning in the bottle, and they're trying to put it, doing remakes of the 80s. That's my take on it. Yeah. But anyways, I'm glad that you all enjoyed this episode. I'm glad that you all voted and participated and did everything for that. I know I've been in this podcast game for a while. I did do a Nightmare on Elm Street franchise with my previous work that I used to do, but I figured I wanted to give it a SaWGuy taste on it, a SaWGuy twist, So on my next episode, I'm going to go through the whole franchise, and let you know everything, because there's a lot more to it. Obviously, Robert Englund, was Fred Krueger, but I don't know if you guys all knew that when they decided to do the sequel, Robert Englund, he wanted just a little bit more money, and they basically almost replaced him and almost changed the whole franchise, right? It's like, whoa, right? Oh, that tripped me out when I first heard it. Like, what the fuck? Are you serious? Yeah, I know. But you'll get more of that in the next episode. But like I said, thanks again for everybody tuning in. I would love to hear all your comments on this episode, if there was anything I missed. I know 30 minutes is short, but I try to make it so that way it's entertaining and everything for you guys. But thanks again for everything, guys. And, like I said, when I have nothing and when I'm done, I'm out, right?
Bow down to the